This is episode number 32 of the Expert Table Tennis Podcast. My name is Ben Larcombe, and joining me on the show today is William Henzell, Australia's greatest ever table tennis player. Some of you will have seen Will's post on Facebook already. He has announced his retirement from table tennis, which came as a bit of a shock to some of us. I'm going to get him on the show and we're going to discuss that decision and talk a bit more about his whole career and everything that he's learned along the way. Will has been massively successful as a table tennis player, 13 times national champion in Australia. He's been a top 100 ranked player several times, great results at Olympics and Commonwealth Games, and he's really been the player to put Australia on the map when it comes to table tennis. There was very little acknowledgement of Australia as a table tennis nation before Will, and when people talk about Australian table tennis, usually the first person that comes to mind is William Henzell. So I'm delighted to have him on the show. I'm releasing podcast episodes once a month from now on. I've actually decided to just release them on the first of the month. So I think that's the simplest way to do it. So I was going to do them on the kind of last Friday of every month, which just got a bit confusing. I thought much easier. First of the month, you know that you've got a new episode of the Expert Table Tennis Podcast. So that's the date to be putting in your diaries going forward. That's definitely enough chat from me. So let's get straight into the interview with William Henzell. My guest on the show today is Australia's William Henzell. Hi, Will.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing very well. It's not the morning over here, but it's really great to talk to you. Now, the reason I decided to get you on the show is that, I don't know, a week or two ago, you released on Facebook that you're retiring from table tennis, and obviously that's come as a bit of a shock to people because it's just gearing up for the next Olympics. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about that and how you came to that decision.
Sure. Well, the decision itself was a long time coming. I actually haven't been playing since about October 2015, so 3 or 4 months before I actually made the announcement that was it, that I was packing it in. So I had quite a long time to come to terms with the decision in my mind and really feel that it was the right thing to do and that I was done. And I mean, I'd been playing for such a long time, over probably, 15, 20 years at a pretty high level and a lot longer than that, competitively and training hard. So I wanted to be really properly sure that I was done. And I really reassessed my priorities. I'd been playing table tennis for a very long time. Things were going quite well at work. I had some big projects and was getting more responsibility. I was studying, doing a part-time MBA at business school, and there just weren't enough hours in the day to fit in everything that I wanted to do, and certainly not to do them well. And I really loathed not doing things to the best of my ability, and I felt that I was really putting all three at risk by doing half-assed efforts. So in the end, it felt very right and like the right time to go. And I understand that might seem a little odd, just, keep playing for a few months and have a crack at the Olympics. But I really didn't have inside me what I knew it would take to put in the hard work and to be competitive in Rio, which, after 3 Olympics, I'm not really there just to get the tracksuit and, have a holiday in Brazil. If I wasn't going to be able to go there and beat people, then I didn't really want to do that.
Yeah, sure. That makes a lot of sense because I know in the lead up to 2012, you went back to Europe for a bit, didn't you, to kind of really build up to it?
Yeah, look, I took 18 months off work and prepared back in Australia for probably 4 or 5 months, getting myself back into physical shape and mental shape, and then headed off to the Schlager Academy over in Austria and spent a year training there that was, exceptionally demanding, both mentally and physically and emotionally. And I'm very happy I did that because I went on and had my best results ever in London and played above what I could have expected. So I guess that was my last real crack of putting everything I had into an event, and I'm happy I did that.
Now, in the kind of statement that you released on Facebook, you said a few things that I thought were interesting. You mentioned kind of just how you weren't enjoying it, or you kind of felt like you were running on empty and lacking the motivation. You said maybe your head wasn't in the right place. I wonder if you could just explain that feeling to people, because I think I remember when I was a younger player, I'd often look up at older players that were ranked really highly and were kind of packing it in. And I couldn't really get my head around why they were doing that. But it does seem that a lot of players reach a point, regardless of their level, where, for some reason it's just not quite as enjoyable as it once was, or they're kind of losing the real drive to give it everything that they've got, and they don't want to, as you say, kind of do a half-assed job and kind of do it a little bit. I wonder if you could just explain, how that feels to reach that point, and where you think it comes from.
Yeah, look, it's a really good observation you've made, and I understand from the outside, being able to play table tennis for a living and play at the Olympics and all of these things, it must be fantastic, and it's all roses all day, every day, and I mean, for me, I pushed myself for a long time, even though I didn't really have the motivation to keep doing it. I've always enjoyed coming out, going to training, trying to improve my skills, trying to, improve my backhand, be able to serve short 100 times out of 100 under tense conditions, and, practice all the components of the game. But I really stopped enjoying the battle of going out and competing. And I mean, I think partly that had to do with the fact that I'd been number one in Australia for the best part of 15 years. There wasn't really anything there was nothing left that I could really achieve in Australia. And every time I went out there, I was the guy who had pressure on to win. And any loss that you'd have, it would be, strange. And you were, trying not to lose instead of trying to win, which isn't a great way of approaching playing. And it's certainly tough to do in the long term. So I think my motivation for keeping on doing that gradually was chipped away at over many years, and that was replaced by doing other things like trying very hard at work and my study, which is kind of the new frontiers for me. And I've got all this stuff left to achieve there that I just didn't have left to achieve in table tennis, and I knew that I didn't have the drive left in me to go back to Europe. And I think even at 33 as I am now, if I'd gone back to Europe and given it another 5 years, I think I could potentially have had my best table tennis ahead of me. But that's just a commitment that I wasn't willing to make, given that I've got a lot of things going on, and it was time to move on.
Yeah, just briefly to touch on that, you say that you think you could still have your best table tennis ahead of you if you had the commitment to go back and train full time in Europe. I wonder what your thoughts are on kind of the age that players peak and how that plays out, because a lot of my listeners, they haven't done loads of table tennis when they were younger, and maybe they've only started taking it seriously in their late teens and 20s, and some people will say that it's already too late for them. What are your thoughts on kind of the ability to peak and continue improving even as you get older into your 30s and 40s even?
Oh, look, I think that the physical restrictions of table tennis probably only really start kicking in, in your late 30s, 40s or 50s. I think it depends a little bit on what kind of game you've got. So if you're, hitting forehands from all over the court and you're running backwards and forwards to the ball, if you don't put a lot of hard work in, it's going to be difficult for you to maintain that level of speed and around the court, and it's probably going to affect you earlier. However, the way table tennis is these days, where you just can't get away with not having a good backhand and a good forehand and a good all-round game, then you can keep improving really at any stage of your life, up until when physical restrictions start biting in. So I think the experience from running TT Edge, and especially now that Brett Clark's become involved and is really driving it forwards, we've seen and is getting a lot of videos sent in from players in their 40s and 50s who have gone onto the program and practicing all these shots that you can make incredible improvements at any age.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the exact same thing, but I do still find that there's some kind of like underlying belief in a lot of coaches and players that, you know, if you haven't done it when you're young, like maybe you're not even able to learn it. But that just hasn't been my experience at all. So I thought it was interesting that you said that even at such a high level that you still thought you'd be able to keep improving and, you know, moving up the ranking list.
Yeah, and I think there's some element of truth there. If you're not an extremely good player by the time you're 12 or 13 years old, you know, you're probably not going to be world champion. I think that's a truth that's pretty hard to deny. But I mean, I guess I'm really looking at everyone's relative standard to what they've achieved previously. And, you know, it wasn't until quite late in my career, probably, you know, late 20s, that I really started being in the right environment, training wise and coaching wise, where I could really start reaching my full potential. And so I kind of only coming to that environment really late on means that I think there was still scope to improve further if I was willing to put in those hours at the table.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a bit more about your story now, because I think you started playing at 6. Is that right?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. So you started at a relatively young age, but you say maybe it wasn't until later in life that you really kind of found that really high quality coaching and environment. I wonder if you could give us like a brief run through of your career from 6 to kind of when you moved back to Australia in 2008.
Sure. So I actually started playing table tennis because I played tennis before I played table tennis. And, you know, tennis is a summer game in Australia, and then they take the tennis nets down and put up these silly netball goals and kick all the kids off the tennis court. So I needed to find a winter alternative to playing tennis. And fortunately, there was a table tennis club just down the road, and I think it appealed to me right from the first time I played it, in that, you know, it wasn't about, you know, who was the strongest or who was the biggest, who could hit the ball hardest. You could outsmart your opponent and actually be a lot more effective by thinking and being mischievous, which I think it really appealed to me when I was young, and probably still when I'm old as well. So I would have been probably 9 or 10. By the age of 9 or 10, I was doing 3 or 4 days a week coaching. You know, by 12 or 13, I was probably playing 6 days a week. And then at the age of 14, I had the opportunity to move overseas, over to Sweden, and you know, become introduced to the Swedish system, which at that time, that was the mid-90s. They were, you know, the best in the world, and had a very good club system underneath to support that. So I told my parents that I wanted to learn Swedish so I could go over there and play table tennis. So I did a couple of years of Swedish lessons with a tutor, and then headed over when I was 14 and started going to Swedish high school, and all in Swedish, which was pretty challenging to start with, and also being able to play table tennis, you know, pretty much every day, 7 days a week. When I was 16, that's when I had the opportunity to move to one of the best clubs in Sweden, Kalmar, which at that time had Jan-Ove Waldner and Jürgen Persson and Kim Song-hui and some other very good players. And that's when I really started training hard, doing kind of 4 hours a day of good quality training with good players and good coaches around me. And that was also about the time I first was injured, which put me out for 3 or 4 months with knees and back. Basically, I fell into the trap that many young players do, which is they go from doing a little bit of training to training very, very hard, instead of making sure they're thinking long term about how to ease themselves into, you know, what really is a full-time job of playing hours and hours every single day.
Sure. Now I guess the question that I want to just slip in there is that you've managed to get a lot of these, you know, pretty brilliant opportunities at a young age. You must have been a good player in order to be able to move to Sweden. Like, you can't just move to Sweden if you're a kind of average regional level player. What do you reckon was responsible for you going from just any kid that decided to start playing because you enjoyed it, to then, you know, getting these opportunities to take it so seriously at such a young age?
Yeah, sure. I was number one in Australia in the under-14s, and I think number two in the under-17s. So, you know, there's no doubt I was up-and-coming player in Australia and talented, but it was my coach in Australia who was Svante, who was a Swedish guy who was married to an Australian lady living down in Adelaide in Australia for a few years, who I was fortunate enough to meet at a young age, and that opened my perspective on, well, you can actually do this as a job and you can play, you know, professionally at some stage, which was very outside the mentality that I was used to in Australia. So I think I was fortunate in the sense that the opportunity presented itself to me. And then, you know, once you're over there and in the system, I played, you know, the under-14s over in Sweden, and I was probably amongst the top two or three in the country at that stage, and that's when I had opportunities to move to other clubs and really dedicate myself to it. But you have to be very proactive as a player, and this was certainly true when I was a senior, and that's probably one thing that one of my few regrets is that I wasn't as proactive as I could have been to always search out the best opportunities all the way through, you know, my 20s when I was still over there doing it professionally on the circuit.
Okay, so what did you then go on to do, and what maybe were the other options that, looking back, you think maybe you should have gone down that route instead?
Yeah, so when I was 24, I just won silver medal in the singles at the Commonwealth Games in Melbourne back in 2006, which, you know, that was a huge thing for me personally. And, you know, it was at that stage where I started thinking and looking, well, you know, where could I take this further? What could I do to take the next level, the next step forwards? And that's when I moved down to Germany and to Frickenhausen, who were the best club in Germany at that time. And that's the step that I think I should have taken earlier, gotten down to Germany, where, you know, it's a pretty the competition in Germany is pretty brutal, and it's really a sink or swim. But the training opportunities that I had there were much, much better than what I had in Sweden. And I wish I'd done that sooner in my career.
Okay, so it was more just leaving it too late, you reckon?
Look, I think so. Through my late teens and early 20s, I was more worried about, you know, the environment that I was in. I was comfortable with my coach, and it was all quite familiar, and I don't think I was pushing myself as hard, or even knew that I could push myself as hard as what when I came to Germany, I saw that everyone down there was doing. And certainly when I went to the Schlager Academy back in 2011, if I'd gotten myself into environments like that earlier, then it would have been beneficial for me.
Yeah, I really like that idea of trying to kind of move into more difficult and challenging environments and getting yourself out of your comfort zone, because it does seem that getting yourself in a group of players and some coaches, and that's really where you see players just all of a sudden really shoot up out of nowhere, because they've made some kind of change to, they might even be like doing very similar practice and stuff, but it's just the change in environment has such a huge impact.
Yeah, and I think being surrounded by people who all want to be world champion or all want to be the very, very best player they can be, just forces everyone to drag themselves upwards rather than just be happy going about roughly what they did yesterday and last month and 6 months ago. And that's the environment that I certainly found in Germany and in Austria, that, you know, it was really put absolutely everything you had into it, or you stood out for not doing that. So, yeah.
Cool. Now I'm thinking about what happened after that. I'm assuming that as you've gone through, you've always been kind of thinking, right, I want to be the best player in the world. Kind of that's your big goal. You want to be as good as you can get. And then I assume at some point, does that start to fade away? Is there like I don't know if kind of like the bubble bursts or how it works for professional players, but I assume you must reach a point where you maybe start to doubt that you can do it, or if you even want to keep doing it. How did that kind of happen for you?
Look, I think the dream of being world champion didn't last too long for me. I was probably, in my teens or late teens when I realized, that's probably not going to happen. And but becoming top 50 in the world or top 30 in the world would be a fantastic achievement. So I don't think I had those kinds of delusions, which, and in hindsight, I think it's probably quite good to have those kinds of delusions and to have that confidence that, that's how good I am and that's how good I'm going to be. But I don't think I ever really, really had them. And it was in 2008 when I decided, well, that's when after the Beijing Olympics, I decided that, I've been doing this for a very long time. I'm struggling a little bit with motivation. I'm pretty tired from grafting it out in Europe and just scraping by from one month to the next, trying to look for contracts and look for good opportunities. And that's when I decided to move back to Australia and start doing other things. So I guess the dream ended for me when I was 26 back then, but was reinvigorated a little bit in 2011 when I moved back there to have a last crack at it.
Sure. And what kind of work did you go into? Had you, because I know some players kind of pretty much scrap school altogether from 16 and just do table tennis. From the sounds of it, you're working in a relatively high pressure job now. Did you kind of continue with school and have that as a backup?
No, so I finished school when I was 17. So I did. I've frustrated me a few times, but I was one course away from finishing Swedish high school. So technically, I haven't. One 10-hour course off. So technically, I haven't even finished high school. But I moved back. When I moved back to Australia, I did a adult entry test for university, and I decided that I was going to go back and do engineering, and did well enough on the test to do that, and was about to start a couple of months off starting. But then I had the opportunity to move to Melbourne from Adelaide, where my family was based, and get into IT. So I knew a friend of mine ran a database consulting company, and he had a history of taking in many different table tennis players over the year and kind of showing them the ropes. I think he thought it was fun and a challenge to do that. And that's really what started my professional career in IT, and now have moved into analytics. So it's certainly an unconventional route to take, and I have very little formal education behind me, and I've really had to work and build that experience through hard work in the roles that I've had.
Yeah, well, I guess the fact that you can show that you're able to really apply yourself to something, there's got to be a lot of transferable skills into jobs after that kind of, the real elite sport career anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the skills are very relevant and transferable, like, trying to be the best that you can every day and having discipline and a very good work ethic, because you just don't reach anywhere in any sport without having that. However, the biggest challenge for me personally has been shifting the mentality of a table tennis player, which is, very selfish, very internally focused on what I need to do every day to be the best that I can be. And you can't really let anything or anyone else hold you back or slow you down, versus working in a corporate environment where, now I have staff that I'm responsible for, and I have to liaise with many different groups all across the company, and shifting that from being a me mentality to how to orchestrate others doing jobs well together, which is just a completely different way of looking at things. And it's something that, I find very challenging and quite enjoyable now, given that I was so internally focused for so many years.
Yeah, definitely. Right. Well, you've been, how old are you now, Will? You 33?
33, almost 34.
Yeah. Okay, almost 34. You started playing when you were 6 years old. So you're kind of 27, 28 years of table tennis experience you've got bottled up in the bank there. Now, I wonder if you were able to kind of share just some of the real big lessons that you've learned along your way that you think might be interesting and useful for players that are listening to this podcast who are, trying to improve their level, that they're serious about their table tennis, they're trying to get the practice in. What advice have you got for players like that?
Sure. Well, I think the first one we've touched on a little bit, which is putting yourself out there, challenging yourself, and taking yourself outside your comfort zone. And I think this is especially relevant for young players. I speak quite often to some of the young up and coming players in Australia, where we're very far away from where the action is in Europe, and it's quite difficult to practice really seriously or hard here, and that's my advice to them has been, if you can afford it and you've got the motivation to, head over to Europe and just immerse yourself in putting everything you have into it for 2-3 years and see how far it can take you. And I think a lot of Australian players have just gone over and this isn't just for Australian players, it's equally relevant if you're from the UK or from the US or wherever, to just take a few years out of your life and go really hard. You don't have to wonder or worry about what if, and I should have done this or I shouldn't have done that. And at least it will give you that experience of putting everything into it and seeing how far you can get. The next point, which is also one of the regrets of my career, that I could never quite burst this bubble, was not being afraid to lose. So I think I had, as a player, I had a few systems that worked extremely well and were extremely effective. I had 3 or 4, strengths that I could dominate most players in most games with, and it was very difficult for the opponent to get out of the rhythms and the tactics that I was putting on them. But I think that held me back in terms of playing better players and not quite being able to break through and beat good players. So I would have had 10 or 15 matches against guys in the top 20, 30, 40, 50 in the world where I lost in close in 6 sets or close in 7 sets, because when it came down to it, I was relying on just the same few strengths that I had, and I didn't have the variety or the variation to, do something that they hadn't seen before in those last few points, those last few crucial points of a game. And that really came down to a fear of losing, and that I hadn't been willing to lose matches that I probably shouldn't have, to have something left in the tank apart from those few strengths that I had.
Okay, it's almost kind of risk taking, being open to gambling a little bit.
I'm not sure if it's gambling as much as, I think as a player, for example, I'll give you an example. So my backhand flick was, I think, was probably my best shot as a player, and there might have been a few people in the world who had better one, but I think it was right up there as an amazing strength of mine. But, however good a shot is, if someone's expecting it, then, you reach a certain level where if they know what's coming, they're going to be ready for it and play an even better shot back past you. So if I'd had, if I'd gotten, 2 or 3 other shots that were also of a very high standard, a really good long push to the forehand, or, a really good long push to the pocket that I was equally as comfortable at playing at 9-all in the 7th set, then it would have given me a level of unpredictability that I just didn't have as a player, because they pretty much knew that I was going to play that shot at 9-all, whatever happened.
Right, I see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's kind of developing a real holistic game so that you're not going to be predictable when it comes down to the important, crucial bits.
That's spot on. That's right. And that takes, a lot of guts to do, and to develop and to not just rely on your strengths, even though it might cost you a few matches on the way, but when it really matters, you've got more options, and table tennis is all about having more options than your opponent.
Sure. I wonder if is there anything in table tennis, any skills that you think are particularly underrated in players, or anything that you think is particularly overrated that's not as important as kind of people make out?
I think one thing that's very underrated are serves, and I think everyone knows that serves are really important, and good serves, the people are frustrated that if they play a good player who's got this great serve and they just can't read it and they lose point after point, and it frustrates them. So everyone knows how important serves are, but very few players, probably myself included, really put the time and effort into serving it as much as they could. And in table tennis, there's only one shot that you have complete control over, that the opponent has no say over, and that is your serve. So I think an absolute minimum for any player who says they're taking table tennis seriously and can keep a straight face is being able to serve from any location on the table. So that's from your backhand or from the middle or from the forehand to any location on the opponent's side, either forehand, middle or backhand, both with pendulum spin, so the kind of spin that will take the ball from your backhand to the opponent's backhand spinning outwards, as well as reverse spin, so whether that's a reverse serve or a tomahawk serve or a backhand serve, being able to spin the ball both ways from any position to any position will just pick you up so many free points, but very few players take the time to actually develop that, and they're more focused on, just if I could hit that 100th forehand in a row on the table, then I'll be better and better, when people miss the point of it's about being effective and simple in what they need to do.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, and it's so hard to dedicate that time to the serve, isn't it? Because compared to everything else, it's just not as much fun. You hear so many players, I've spoken to players that are relative beginners but really serious, and I've spoken to players like yourself, kind of professionals, and so many people, if they're honest, do just say they don't spend as much time on serve as they should, even though they want to improve. And it's just, I don't know, developing habits or something. But we definitely got to find a way to get everyone doing more service practice if they really want to improve their level.
Yeah, that's right, and that was certainly the case for me. That I think it was, again, I was limiting myself. I was a bit scared of doing, different serves or new serves when it really came down to it. And again, these are the things that cost you matches. So, I've certainly fallen into that bucket myself, and that's one of my regrets as a player. So everyone listening, it's not too late to change. It is for me, but not for you.
More service practice for everyone.
More service practice for everyone.
Cool. Well, it's been great talking to you. I wonder, kind of what you've got coming up in the future, kind of short term, long term. Have you got kind of goals? I assume you're quite kind of a goal driven person from all of the table tennis. What are you focused on now that now that kind of the table tennis has been relieved of you? What are your goals? What are you kind of striving to achieve?
Sure. So I'm partway through an MBA at Melbourne Business School, which is extremely challenging. It's I'm really enjoying it, but it is hard work. It's basically 2 years of 30, 40 hours a week on top of full-time work. So I don't really have much time outside of my study and my work. So I'm the analytics manager of a law firm, Slater and Gordon, who have operations across Australia and the UK. So between those two things, I really have little time to focus on other things. But one of the projects, kind of my only project outside of those two things, is the app for for Apple and for Android that I've been working on with Brett Clark from TT Edge and a couple of neuroscientists, which is really interesting. It's been a lot of fun to do and a lot of fun to learn about. So we've put out just an initial, really test the market and see if there's interest for it. It's just me playing backhand and playing forehand and seeing if you can pick the ball. So you've got to tap either on your forehand or tap either on your backhand and see if you can predict where I'm going to hit the ball. So we've had about 7,000 downloads or thereabouts in the first couple of months since that's been released, which for the level the product's at the moment, I think is actually a fantastic result. And
that's brilliant. That's a lot of downloads. So
for something that's basically just the first step in what we want to do. So it's a very basic version of it. So we've just finished off a whole stack of filming for it to make it really a comprehensive training support guide for people. So there'll be serves, there'll be different spins that you have to try and pick. You'll be reacting it'll be much more interactive and more like what it would be like to play me in a game of table tennis right there on your phone.
For those people that haven't checked this out, definitely have a search for the Table Tennis Edge app. I think that there's videos on YouTube and stuff. This is one of the things that I'm most excited about at the moment, because it's like a genuinely new idea to table tennis training, or kind of online table tennis training, that we haven't seen before. We get so many people popping up videos of how to do certain strokes, and and that's great. But this is something that's really different and not been done before, and I think could prove to actually be really, really useful for teaching people those skills that you can't get from just doing 100 forehands against a robot. But it could be a way for them to really improve their overall table tennis level, sitting at home kind of on their phone or on their tablet or something.
Yeah, I completely agree. When you're sitting on the train coming home from study or work, or sitting on the loo, then you can tap away and actually double, triple, times 10 the amount of exposure you're getting to seeing table tennis balls coming at you and having to have a conscious, active response to what's coming. So we've worked with a couple of neuroscientists on this. One of them, Trevor Brown, who represented Australia at the 2004 Olympics, and they've had some really interesting results about how people are able to predict what's coming earlier and start reacting much earlier to the ball coming at you, and picking a side and picking a shot than without the app, which given that table tennis is a game of time, and if you can just be that little bit faster than the opponent, you're gonna dominate them. So it's very exciting to be a part of, and I'm looking forward to seeing where we can take it.
Hugely exciting. So definitely people should go and check that out. I think that's it for the interview. It's been brilliant talking to you, William. Thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show. You got any final words for the audience before we say goodbye?
Yeah, look, thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me. It's been good to share my final words in table tennis for the moment. And I think if there's one thing I'd say to people, it's just make sure you're still enjoying your table tennis. And if you find that you feel you're in a bit of a rut, or you're just coming down doing the same old things every time you step into a table tennis hole, try and mix it up. Go to a different club, find some different players, get a robot. Just try not to fall into that rut where you're not enjoying it anymore. So be creative.
Brilliant. Cheers, Will. It's been great talking to you, and yeah, I just wish you the best of luck in the future with everything you're getting up to. You sound unbelievably busy, and I think if you'd been like training for Rio on top of everything else you were doing, I think you would have possibly been the busiest man in the world.
Well, my wife probably would have divorced me and I would have started drinking. It would have been a bad result. But thank you, Ben. Thanks very much for having me.
Cheers. Great. It's been good talking to you, Will. And yeah, best of luck for the future.
Okay, thanks, mate.
Cheers. Bye. I hope you enjoyed listening to that interview. I'd like to say a huge thanks, of course, to Will for joining me on the show. It wasn't easy putting that one together with the massive time difference. I think it was 10 p.m. for me and 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning for Will. With work and stuff, it took a lot of jiggling around to find a time that worked, but I'm really glad that we managed to have that chat and learn from all of the lessons that Will's got from 27, 28 years of high-level table tennis. The one thing that really stood out for me from that interview, and there was so much good stuff, but it was the idea of not getting too comfortable in your training, not settling for situations where you know that you're not putting yourself in the best situations. So that can be different for different people. For Will, maybe it meant that he stayed in Sweden for too long and he should have taken the step and been proactive to chuck himself in at the deep end in Germany and really get into that environment. I guess for younger players in countries like Australia or perhaps the United States, maybe they do need to make that move into getting into a club in Europe and moving away from home if they really want to take it seriously. For you listening, maybe it's different. Maybe it's going to a different club, a bigger club that has more players, a better structure, better coaching, and maybe you feel quite comfortable at the club that you're at the moment and you've got friends there, but you've realised that your level's kind of you're maybe in a bit of a plateau, a bit of a rut. You're not improving as fast as you were. Maybe it's time to take that next step and look for that training environment, that coach and system and group of players that's really going to bring you on. So I think that's a lesson that everyone can apply, and you need to be constantly looking at your environment and where you are and checking that you're in the best place for your table tennis. And I really like what he said of give it a year, give it 2 years, put everything into it if you really want to go for it. And if it works, brilliant. And if not, and you realise that perhaps table tennis isn't for you, then what have you lost? You can go back and try different things. But yeah, if you're going to go for it, really go for it. And I think Will's done a lot of that in his career, and now he's realised that sure, he could spend another 10 years playing and continue to probably be the best player in Australia and do the tournaments. But if he's not giving it everything, he doesn't want to just kind of plod along going through the motions. And I think that's something that we can all relate to and respect. So, yeah, huge thanks to Will for coming on the show. Wish him the best of luck in the future. And, yeah, especially excited about this TT Edge app. Go and check that out. I'll be back in a week's time with a brand new episode of the show. Guest is to be confirmed. To check out the show notes of this episode, you can head on over to experttabletennis.com/episode 32. You can click some links and a few more descriptions on there. That's all for today. Thanks for listening, and I will see you in the next episode, which will be released on the 1st of April. Have a good one.